Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fifth chapter of the book of Romans. We learn of the peace and joy which comes from victorious Christian living, and we also read of the love of the cross and the range we're going to cover today. We're going to take it up the first 11 verses, but before we do that, we want to review what we read in the fourth chapter. Now, the first significant theological doctrinal term we read of in the fifth chapter is that of justification, and Paul exalts Abraham as an exemplar of the principle he is trying to espouse of justification by faith. Verse 2, "For if Abraham was justified by works, he has boasting, but not before Elohim. That salvation is by grace through faith and not by works," we read of in Ephesians 2:8-9, is precisely for the point that no man can boast. So if we could do a single thing to advance ourselves to heaven, if we could claim we got there on our own merit, then we could boast. But not be, we can boast before men. Look at all that I do. Look at all the charity I give and all, etc. But you're not going to be able to boast before Elohim, who knows all and sees all. And he uses Genesis 15:6 to prove his point. Abraham believed Yahweh, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness. Reckoned is alternately translated as imputed. So the same concept of on the cross, his righteousness is imputed to us, that being the Messiah, who this chapter closes on. But what was true for Abraham is true for us. And to him who is not working but believes on him who is justifying the wicked, his faith is reckoned for righteousness. So what is true for Abraham is true for his children. His children are not only the Jewish people, but also he is also the father of them who believe. So Gentile Christians, he is our father inasmuch as he is the faithful remnant of Israel. But most of Israel by the New Testament time had been enslaved and ensnared by their own legalistic system, the Pharisaical system, and they thought they could be justified by their works, so they kept adding to the laws of Moses and everything. But the simple But now the what's so wrong and inferior about legalism is that it presumes to place Yahweh in our debt, whereas grace reverses the favor. This is communicated in verse 4. So if we could work there, then that implies that the sovereign creator is in our debt. He owes us salvation because we did all these great things for you. But what did we read in Matthew 7? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not perform signs and wonders? Depart from me, ye workers of iniquity. I never knew ye. We're going to skip to verse 13. In between is just a citation of David and minimizing the significance of the physical circumcision. That is, the children of Abraham. That was their covenant, the Jewish people. But before the circumcision, it all began with belief. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the Torah, but through a righteousness of faith. So even before the law of Moses, there was no law before the law of Moses, but Abraham is the father of the Jewish people and not Moses. So it all began with faith. Now Abraham didn't need the law because the law is written for an unruly adulterer. Everything we read of in 1 Timothy, first chapter, it is not a testament of the nation of Israel's goodness that they had to have a law to constrain them, but the fact that prophets had arisen to reinforce the covenant. Was the fact that it was even necessary was a taint on their collective reputation. But it's all righteousness through faith is introduced as early as the 17th verse of the first chapter of this book. He quotes Habakkuk 2:4. On account of this it is of faith, verse 16, that it be according to grace for the promise to be made certain to all the seed, but only to those who are of the Torah, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Abraham's name, his original name, Abram, translates as exalted father, but Abraham translates as father of many nations. So the one nation that he fathered, that sprang from his loins, that was special and select and chosen was the Jewish people. They had the circumcision, they had the law, they had everything else, all these forms of advanced special revelation, but the Gentiles grasped out in faith to Jews like Paul's message and were being engrafted into the grapevine we read of in the 11th chapter of this book, or the 9th rather. They had an equal claim to be the children of Abraham, those who believed, because Abraham was not justified by works, but by faith. And what was true for him is true for us. Verse 21, and being completely persuaded that what he promised he was also able to do, being completely persuaded. Now, he initially doubted the promise of him siring a child of promise, the promised people, the promised nation, in his advanced age, when his wife was past the childbearing age. They had given up years ago on trying to sire a child. This would have been the ultimate disgrace in the ancient world. But he believed him. He only had to be chided or rebuked once, and because he believed, his wishes became materialized in the process of observing the promise and taking it without compromising one's commitment to it. Therefore also it was reckoned to him for righteous, Genesis 15:6 again. And not because of him alone was it written that it was reckoned to him. So what is true for Abraham is true for us, and he is an example, and may we profit by his example. He hoped against hope. He believed when there was no scientific sense that his wife could conceive at this advanced age. But he believed in spite of the obstacles and in spite of the circumstances, because his faith in his rock, his heavenly rock, was ironclad. But also because of us, to whom it shall be reckoned to us, who believe in him who raised up Yahshua, our Messiah, our Master, from the dead. So the 4th chapter is mostly about Abraham. David does receive passing message, but it ultimately concludes on his biological descendant, the seed, singular seed, as Paul is clear to point out in Galatians 3:16, of Abraham, through whom all the nations were blessed, be it Jews, Gentiles, everyone else. And he was resurrected. That is the central, most controversial, yet crucial claim of our faith. Who was delivered up because of our trespasses and was raised for us to be justified. So the source of our justification is not us, not anything we did, but what he's already done for us. He alone was constitutionally capable to satisfy the sin penalty because he was sinless, because he was divine, and because he was human, and because he had this dual nature. He alone was the bridge that could reconcile humanity and divinity. Reconciliation is the final theologically significant term we're going to read of, but we're going to open with justification. Verse 1, chapter 5, book of Romans. Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with Elohim through our Master Yahshua Messiah. So one of the things we didn't explain, but probably should have, is the concept, the doctrine of justification. What does it mean? And the answer is that it is the theological term whereby a guilty sinner is declared innocent at the judgment. And in and of ourselves, we cannot procure our own justification, our own right standing by him, in whose sacred presence no degree of allowance of sin cannot tolerate any sin and with any degree of allowance. But through the faith that we can't do it, but he can, that is sufficient to procure our justification. So our justification is already sealed. It was sealed, done finally and permanently and eternally on the cross. All we need to do is reach out by faith. And the peace with Elohim is not a subjective peace. It has a definite object, and the peace that he can provide is above and beyond the peace that the world can provide, the peace that we know or experience. But it's all made possible through his Son. But the peace is more than the mere cessation of conflict, as the world defines peace. It's just the absence of commotion and chaos, but the peace that he offers has a positive element, the serenity and the shalom, which gives us spiritual blessings and prosperity, as well as often temporal. But through whom so it's, remember that the access comes through to the Father, comes through the Son. He is our ticket, he is our mediator, he is our conduit. Verse 2, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we exult in the hope of the esteem of Elohim. So the concept of access to the direct presence of divinity would have been restricted in the Jewish mindset. Their temple, they had a sacred of sacreds before which even the high priest could enter but once annually. On the day of Yom Kippur, he went there into the direct presence of divinity, and so sacrosanct was the occasion that the Jews were in the practice of tying a rope to the bottom of his feet in the off chance that he died, lest his dead body contaminate the very presence of divinity. And then there was the outer curtain beyond which Levites could not pass, and then there was a curtain separating the Jews from the Gentiles. The Gentiles had a wall, and there was a sign that said, if anyone is not a Jew and enter here, you shall die. So they weren't messing around with them, but Yahshua tore down the curtain and broke down the wall, tore down the curtain in Matthew 27 and in Luke 23, and broke down the wall, Ephesians 2:14, and through him we have intimate access. He is our sympathetic high priest before we are admonished to enter into his throne room boldly in Hebrews 4:16. And this is where we'll stand, and this is where we will exalt in the thing we now hope. It is a future reality that will be materialized in present form when we are there. And it is that of the esteem of Elohim. The degree of his esteem is above and beyond esteem as we know and understand it. And not only this, but we also exult in persecution, knowing that persecution works endurance. Now notice what he doesn't say. We exalt because of persecutions. He says we exalt in persecutions. I just say, in spite of the painful reality that we are being persecuted without a cause, we rejoice. We exalt in the persecution because our character is being developed and refined through the furnace of affliction. And through that furnace, we are able to develop the trait of endurance, without which salvation is impossible. What do we read in the Mount Olivet Discourse is, he who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. So endurance is key and critical, and persecution will make it a lot easier. Going through the having our faith tested in foul weathers can refine us for the fair weather. So it's all about balance, but without persecution, without difficulty, without the sin problem, Christianity, salvation wouldn't be necessary. But it's also a marathon, not a sprint, so endurance is key. Christian life is not a once-a-week gig. It's not something we do on Sunday, once an hour. It is an all-day, every day, throughout the day, 24/7, 365-day-a-year gig. So without endurance, you're just not going to make it. You're going to throw in the towel when the worries of the ages, when all these idols in your life crowd out Elohim from the picture. And endurance, approvedness, and approvedness, hope. So endurance has the additional beneficial side effect of procuring our approvedness, our right standing in heaven, which in turn gives us hope. But approvedness, now the word study to show thyself approved, now 1 Timothy 2:15, and what the Greek word approved means, it is closely connected to the word within the word, that of being proven. So you have to be tested in order to be approved. Without the testing, without the persecution, without the necessary evils that enter into our life for us to grow through and develop the character we could not otherwise have in the absence of these challenges. It's all part of a plan. So that's why we can rejoice in persecution, because we know it's all going to end well, and it's for a greater cause and greater end. So blessed are we if we abandon it and not forsake it, and maintain the hope that better days lie ahead and are ahead is critical whenever life is not throwing you lemons. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of Elohim had been poured out in our hearts by the Ruach Kadesh, which was given to us. So from start to finish, we witnessed the trio of faith, hope, and love. So he speaks of faith in the first verse, and then and in the second, and then the hope in the fourth and fifth, and then he speaks of love. So this trio, these three cardinal Christian virtues, the most recognizable place is 1 Corinthians 13:13, where we read that trio in tandem and in combination. But these no wrong can come. Now the terms faith and hope are not exactly synonymous. I like to think of faith as an umbrella concept in which exists trust and hope and belief and everything else, and much in the same way I consider wisdom an umbrella term which combines prudence and discretion and discernment and knowledge and understanding, all those things. So faith is greater than hope. And to compare the two, it has often been said that God reveals not so much of himself that we may not live without faith, but not so little of himself so that we do not have hope. And we have to reach out. And now, as the narrative transitions, we read of the remarkable love at the cross. Now we see two things when we look at the cross. We see all the hatred and the hostility and the sin. He was surrounded by sinners, dying on their behalf. He became sin who knew not sin, in order that he became what he was not, in order that we may become that which we are not, the righteousness of Elohim. He made that possible, and that is the supreme act of sacrificial love. Greater love hath no man than this, that he should lay his down life for his friends. He laid down his life for his enemies. So that's the most exalted standard of truly Christian love, to love your enemies and your friends indistinctly. For while we were still weak, Messiah in due time died for the wicked. He didn't die for the good, he didn't die for the godly, he didn't die for the righteous, he died for the wicked. And every one of us who's ever committed a wicked act, had a wicked thought, or did a wicked deed is by definition wicked. He alone was born without sin, lived without sin, and died without sin. And his strength compensates and satisfies and transcends our weakness. So there is love in his mercy that is greater than our transgression, and there is strength in his omnipotence that is greater than our weakness. And to reduce it to a paradox cliche, man is never so strong as when he is weak. But it was all part of a providential timetable. That's what I'm reading when I read the word due times. It was the plan and path of redemption was set in motion before the foundation of the earth, and now the inevitable expectation had in the passage of time become a present reality, and now it was a past. He's writing it in the past tense. He died for the wicked, and he had not died that long ago in the writing of this, 20 years tops but his death is eternally efficacious. For one shall hardly die for a righteous one, though possibly for a good one. Someone would even have the courage to die. So no one's lining up to die for anyone. It is the human nature, human trait. Look out for number one, survival of the fittest. The concept of self-sacrifice is anathema to the Darwinian dog-eat-dog ethos. So we're not going to lay our lives on the line for someone unless, they were righteous or unless they were good. He alone is those two things perfectly and intrinsically. But, there is none among us. Now, soldiers die for their country, fathers die for their children, but do random strangers die for every random stranger? He does know us all because he created us all, but from the human point, he did, But Yahweh proves his own love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Messiah died for us. While we were yet sinners, so once more, he did not die for the good, he did not die for the godly, he did not die for the just, he did not die for the righteous, he did not die for the moral, he did not die for the ethical, he died for us, and we are still when we were still sinners. Now we still sin, but the term sinners is now we're all sinners, but when I read that word in the Bible, I read it as someone who is living in sin. So before we came to the born again experience, we were dead in sins and trespasses, Ephesians 2:1, and we were still sinners. We were stuck in sin. We were on Satan's slave plantation, stuck there, and we were lost and loving it. So, the other challenge and difficulty and temptation with sin is that it is easy to hate the sins that we do not do, but love the ones that we commit. But his love was proven. It was objectively, verifiably demonstrated. So the doctrine of divine love is not only a biblical doctrine, it is a fact that was conclusively demonstrated on the cross at Calvary. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. So we are justified by two things, our own faith, but our faith is only as valid as its object. So if we have faith in the blood that was shed for us, so faith, the merits and worth and value of faith is wholly derivative of the object upon which it rests. So faith in anything else is faith misplaced. You can have faith in Buddha, you can have the faith in Muhammad, you can have faith in any guru, but faith in the blood is alone going to justify you, get you in the right standing, be washed clean, be washed white as if no sin ever entered you, never crossed your mind, and you're going to be saved from wrath. Now the wrath is the final judgment. That much is indicated by the antecedent words, we shall be saved. So the wrath of which he speaks is the final judgment. And there's only one way out, and it's through him, the same one through whom we also have access by faith into the grace. Verse 2. For if being enemies we are restored to grace with Yahweh through the death of his Son, much more having been restored to grace, we shall be saved by his life. So there can be no peace, the long sought after peace of which he speaks in the first verse, the peace with Elohim, if we are at war with him, and especially not if he is at war with us. Now Yahweh is long-suffering. He's willing to win a world over of people who are deliberately alienated and estranged from him through their own volition, and he's seeking to win them back. The world is at war against a force and an entity which is trying to reconcile it to himself, but the war stubbornly clings on, and there are definite enemies. As Christians, I think we are sometimes erroneously taught not to have any enemies at all. First off, without enemies, life would be dull as hell. Second of all, if you have enemies, that means you stand for something. And so the world shouldn't like us. They're not going to like us, and we got to accept that by faith that we are. But far better to be an enemy of the world than to be an enemy of Yahweh. So, but while we were enemies, we were restored to grace through the death of his Son. So the Son's death, the atonement, is what makes it all possible. It's what makes it all applicable and efficacious, but we have been restored. So restored is closely connected to reconciliation, is the most frequent translation of that word, reconciled to favor. Now reconcile means by definition to put an end to enmity or hostility. So reconcile, the etymological prefix means, a return or something else. So we were born and created good, but then we went bad, but then through his goodness we can be declared good through his Son. And our lives paradoxically spring, our eternal lives paradoxically spring from his death. He is the first fruit of the resurrection. And not only this, but we also exult in Yahweh through our Master Yahshua, Messiah, through whom we have now received the restoration to favor. So it is only right to rejoice and praise and exclaim and exalt and just to adulate affectionately the Father through the Son, and the same one and through whom we have who is able to bridge the divide, the reconciliation to favor. And one of the things I should have done when I did this earlier was just note the parallel or the rhyme pattern between the 9th and the 10th verse. They both say, "We shall be saved," and before that he speaks of reconciled and justified. So those two terms, we've already defined what they mean. And in between, through his blood and through the death. So the death and the blood, he died and he bled. He literally did so on the cross at Calvary. So once more, we see two things when we look at the cross. We see all the hatred in the world, all the hostility, all the sin, and then we see the love of it all. And that's what I see when I look at the cross, and I encourage you to do the same. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.